Good afternoon, everyone. We're bringing today's Education and Economic Development Subcommittee hearing to order. Today, we'll be beginning with our community colleges. And first of all, we'll hear from David Romans, who will be the budget analyst for today. Thank you for coming.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So Kelly Norton is the analyst. She is out sick today, so you're stuck with me trying to explain this budget. So it'll be shorter than it would have been if Kelly was here. So if you start on the cover page, you can see the budget decreases overall about $10 million or 2% to $466 million. You jump ahead to page 5, Exhibit 1 looks at the 4-year successful persister rate community colleges. So successful persisters are people who had at least 18 credits in their first 2 years of school, and then after 4 years have either graduated, are still enrolled, or have transferred. And you can see it's been pretty stable in the 71% range. Exhibit 2 on the next page shows that, not surprisingly, there's differences in kind of results for the students in terms of how they're assessed when they enter community college. So the college-ready students have the highest graduation rate after 4 years and the highest persistence rate at 83%. Students who need to take developmental classes, those who complete those classes are also pretty high on the persister rate, but not as successful as the college-ready. And then the developmental non-completers obviously struggle a little bit more compared to the other groups. Let's skip ahead to page 8, Exhibit 4. So that shows you the successful persister rate by community college. You can see there's variation across the community colleges. The next page, 9, Exhibit 5, is sort of an interesting chart. It takes a look at the cohort of students who required developmental coursework in 2018. And you can see here there's a very wide variation among schools, with 98% of the students in Baltimore City Community College requiring developmental coursework, and as low as in the 30% range at Chesapeake College. Then if you look in those other columns on the right, the developmental completers and non-completers, you can see there's a big difference among the schools. Anne Arundel Community College has been quite successful, with 92% of their developmental students completing the coursework. And you can see, Prince George's County Community College is only at 27%. So pretty wide variation amongst the community colleges and how successful they are in getting their students through the developmental coursework. And there's a recommendation for committee narrative asking MAC to kind of report on the best strategies on developmental coursework, and if there are lessons that can be learned by the more successful schools. Page 10 just shows you the 4-year graduation and transfer achievement gap by different racial groups, kind of consistent with recent patterns. Asian and white students tend to have higher graduation and transfer rates than African American and Hispanic students. So there's been some improvement over the longer term for the minority students. Page 11, community college enrollment. So in recent years, you've seen community college enrollment dropping, going all the way back to 2013 when we had almost 140,000 students. That reversed a bit this fall with an increase of about 5,000 students at the community colleges. So the first increase we've seen in a while, and getting them closer to the 2020 enrollment levels. All right, I'm going to skip ahead to the discussion of the budget, starting on page 14, Exhibit 9. It's a pie chart there that shows where the money in this budget goes. Most of it, $375 million, is the CADE formula. The other large chunk is retirement for teachers and other staff at the community colleges. There's some other smaller programs that make up the rest. Exhibit 10 on page 15 shows you the change from the 24 budget to what the governor is proposing for 25. The biggest change is the CADE funding formula drops by about $18.5 million compared to the prior year. And that's partially offset by increased expenditures on the retirement contributions that the state makes. So overall, about a $10 million decrease. So let's focus on the CADE formula. Exhibit 11 on page 16 shows the trends in the CADE funding since fiscal 20. On the right-hand side, it shows you the fiscal 25 allowance before the BRFA and after the BRFA. As you can see, until fiscal 25, community college funding has been increasing fairly steadily. It's over 10% average annual rate of growth from 20 to 24. One of the big drivers of that is the way the formula works is the community colleges get a percentage of the aid per FTE at the public four-year institutions, at selected public four years. And that by statute, that percentage has been growing to 29% in 2024. And the governor's makes a number of changes to the formula, but one of them is to reduce that percentage to 26.5% in the BRFA. And that is a permanent change he's proposing. That's not a one-year change. That's a permanent adjustment to the formula. Exhibit 12 on page 17 notes that in addition to the BRFA, there's another interesting provision or action that the governor took that reduces funding for community colleges a bit. So normally when the state is calculating the aid per FTE at the selected public four years, they use the enrollment for fiscal 25 in this case that the University System of Maryland and Morgan and St. Mary's report. That was what their expectation is. And that's been true for at least a decade. The administration this year chose to use MHEC's estimates instead. MHEC's estimates of enrollment at those public four years are about 6,000 students lower, which results in the, or I'm sorry, higher, which results in the aid per FTE coming down, which is, if you look on to page 18, and ultimately using that MHEC enrollment results in 13 million less in funding through the CADE formula for community colleges than if you use what the public four years are reporting, and you can see by school what the impact of that is on the community colleges. Now, statute is silent on what enrollment should be used. So the administration didn't do anything wrong, but they broke with longstanding practice and just shows a number that's quite different than what we've seen before. When we get to the MHEC analysis later on in session, we're going to be recommending that you clarify the statute in the Budget Reconciliation Act to say what enrollment should be used, so we don't have kind of a jumping back and forth in the future. Exhibit 13 on page 19 just shows you there's a number of changes to the formula that the administration is proposing. I talked about the big one is the statutory level of funding, but they're also eliminating the hold harmless provision that protects community colleges that, for example, have enrollment declines. And they're really changing the formula to be sort of very responsive to enrollment changes. The marginal cost would be 100% of the formula rather than 60% currently. Exhibit 14 on page 20 shows you the savings in the out years from the governor's BRFA proposal, which grow from the 23 million in 25 to about 30 million in fiscal 29. And then exhibit 15 shows you 24's funding, the current law funding before the BRFA, and then the BRFA funding by community college. So you can look and see how the different community colleges are impacted by the BRFA provision. As you can see, it results in reductions for pretty much all of them. There are some issues in the analysis related to tuition and fees at the community colleges. I'm not going to go through them. You can peruse those at your leisure. The last thing I would mention is on page 29, the recommended action, which is the narrative I mentioned before. We're asking for a report on developmental education at the community colleges. Madam Chair, that completes the presentation.
Thank you so much for your coming in and assisting. Are there any questions for Mr. Romans? I have a quick question, but if you can't answer it, it's totally understandable. Just looking at the, I think it was one of the last pages when we were looking at the BRFA cuts, it looked like Frederick Community College had probably the smallest. It's about 70,000, and I didn't know how that was being informed. Are there other like grant funds that are helping with that formula? It seems very small compared to everyone else.
Right. Off the top of my head, I don't know what component.
Yeah.
We can follow up.
Thank you so much. Seeing that there's no other questions, we'll begin with our community colleges panel. Oh, sorry. Before that, we're going to have a virtual testimony from Dr. Rai, Acting Secretary of MHAC. Oh, he's personally or virtual? Okay. Okay, I was gonna say, I feel like he's emerging shortly.
Just a couple of minutes.
Oh, there you go. We're getting closer.
Yeah, dealing with technologies in two parts of the world, right?
Yeah, you're doing fantastic. We can hear you well and see you. So please commence.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Good afternoon, committee members. I am Acting Secretary, Dr. Sanjay Rai. Again, I would like to thank Department of Legislative Services staff for their very thorough analysis of the budget. I appreciate the administration's commitment to higher education. The Moore Miller administration continues to reaffirm their commitment to leaving no one behind. As you are aware, Maryland is home to 16 outstanding community colleges. Maryland's community colleges serve a vital function, a very important role in post-secondary education. Our students and residents who had tough K through 12 experience, students and residents who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, and some who decide to attend college later in life, or some who want to further their career aspirations or fulfill life's purpose, they attend community colleges. Community colleges are beacon of light for us. In fact, the Aspen Institute states they have a broad mission to provide academic programming and skills training to prepare students for jobs or transfer to four-year colleges and universities. In order to assess and make effective use of community colleges training resources, many workers, particularly those with low income and families' responsibilities, need services and support that go beyond what a college typically provides. End of the quote. I would like to mention that I spent a major part of my professional experience at a community college, Montgomery College in Montgomery County, Maryland. Community colleges are a strong link in Maryland's post-secondary education pipeline, increasing enrollment at four-year colleges and universities, which must be supported through academic programming and student success with access to financial aid. MHEC supports the work being done at community colleges through various academic program approvals and scholarships provided to students, which strengthen Maryland's workforce development. The recent discussions regarding the CATE formula funding has brought to light a few points that I would like to eliminate. Whenever looking at the budget, my view is always to look at 2, 3, 4 years trend. In FY 2023, the colleges received about $355 million in CATE funds for about 73,000 eligible FTEs. In FY 25, the colleges are budgeted to receive about $374 million in CATE funds for about 69,000 eligible FTEs. In FY 22, total CATE funding. In FY 2020, the total CATE funding was about $249 million for eligible FTEs, about 88,000. In FY 21, the total CATE funding was about $249 million for about 86,000 eligible FTEs. FY 2022, the total CATE funding was $290 million for about 81,000 eligible FTEs. FY 23, total CATE funding was $355 million for eligible FTEs, about 73,000. FY 24 CATE funding was about $393 million for about 68,000 FTEs. FY 2025 proposed funding, as I said earlier, is about $374 million for about 69,000 eligible FTEs. In closing, I would like to say that MHAC fully supports the governor's budget and is focused on expanding educational opportunities and improving financial aid delivery to students and families in need. The investments made in community colleges continue to translate into real workforce results and enable students an opportunity to close wage gaps and boost career opportunities. Thank you for this opportunity. With that, I turn to a formal response regarding the participation of recent high school graduates in post-secondary education and transfer. You have our written response to those requests, and I'm happy to answer any question. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rai, for your participation from across the world. We really appreciate you being here with us today. Are there any questions for the Secretary? Seeing none, thank you so much. We'll be moving on to our community colleges panel. At this time, can Dr. Felicia Williams of Prince George's Community College, Dr. Sandra Kurtinitis, president of the Community College of Baltimore County, and lastly, Dr. Brad Phillips, executive director of the Maryland Association of Community Colleges. Great to see everyone today.
Afternoon. Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Brad Phillips, the Executive Director of the Maryland Association of Community Colleges. And before I begin, I just want to introduce some of the other presidents that are in the room as well here to support our budget. I'll start with Rose Mintz, who will become the next, she's the interim president right now at Carroll, sitting next to Jim Ball, the president of Carroll Community College, Cliff Coppersmith, the president of Chesapeake College, Don Lindsay, the president of Anne Arundel Community College, Teresa Felder, the president of Hartford Community College, Mary Bolt, president of Cecil College, Yolanda Wilson, president of the College of Southern Maryland, Rich Midcap, the president of Garrett College, Jim Clobber, the president of Hagerstown Community College, and last but not least, Jermaine Williams, president of Montgomery College. I have to catch my breath. I want to thank the analyst, Ms. Norton, for her fantastic analysis, and I really do wish her the best as she recovers, hopefully nicely and not watching and just getting rest. But also thank Mr. Romans for going through the analysis thoroughly. You heard me say earlier this week, there is no other segment in higher education that does more to increase social and economic mobility for our students. As open enrollment institutions whose mission is to provide accessible and affordable opportunities, we take students who have nowhere else to go. The proposed reduction in the BRFA and the miscalculation highlighted by Mr. Romans would make this the second largest reduction in the CADE funding formula in the history of the formula. We're just now recovering from the cut in the BRFA that happened in 2009. And we are up in enrollment 8.3% more, 4 times larger than any other segment in Maryland. I think there's a misunderstanding as to how our funding operates. As we are getting more funding than we previously had and our enrollment is down, that does not translate into increases as it would be suggested. The argument fails to understand how we are linked to our four-year institutions. And when we receive full CADE funding, we receive 29 cents for every dollar that we receive. Rebasing in this instance is another word for creating equity in how the state funds higher education by saying community colleges should only get 26.5 cents for every dollar the USM institutions receive. That's why it's not an accurate statement. Context is important. And just to help explain how Maryland may differ from the national average, there was a report released today by the state higher education executive officers. They're called the State Higher Education Finance Report. According to this report, the state funds four-year institutions at around 5.3% higher than the national average. For Maryland's community college, the state support is 16% lower than the national average. I also want to take on some of the other calculations that are in the back of the BRFA that you discussed. The BRFA would make the 26.5% link permanent. This permanent rebasing is not tied to any policy goals or study that would demonstrate how this would benefit students or represent an equitable distribution of state support for community colleges. The percentage itself seems completely arbitrary, and so does the other changes being suggested in how to calculate the costs as defined currently. The current formula with all its components was a result of research and policy goals when CADE was first developed. Approving these changes would allow the BRFA to be the method to make long-standing policy decisions, but these alterations to the formula seem to have no feedback from policymakers, so I urge you to reject those recommendations in the BRFA. Thank you again for your continued support. Should have started with that. Please let community colleges be the tool that helps the state grow economically and bring in more tax revenue and be the door to more students seeking the middle class. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brad. You've said it very well. Madam Chair and delegates, my delegate sitting over there. Let me proceed this way. This is a very serious matter for us, and I would like to speak plainly without mincing words. The surprise announcement of the BRFA actually felt like a sucker punch. Should this BRFA pass, the community colleges, underfunded for 24 of the last 26 years, will lose just about $22 million in state funding, and we will once again be drawn into the grueling lists of annual rebasing. My college will lose $4.5 million through this BRFA, and the impact on our college will be immediate and fierce. As CCBC has made a commitment to leading with equity, as I think we all have at the community college, our college has not raised tuition since 2018. However, by June, I will recommend a tuition increase to the college's Board of Trustees of at least $5 to $6 per credit. More troubling for us at CCBC is the likely dismantling of an amazing program, an amazing tuition-free initiative, which we have been able to fund by pulling many funds together. We had 49,000 students last year, and I didn't notice when we had the review of the BRFA that too many of our continuing ed students were counted. But if you count all of that, we serve, all of us, about 300,000 plus students a year. We have 49,000 of them. 82% of them are low income and minority students who come from socially and economically vulnerable communities. So tuition free means that 85% of all of those 49,000 students have been able to attend CCBC tuition free. That's full-time, that's part-time, that's credit, and that's non-credit. And we have 25,000 non-credit students who have to be counted. They have to be counted in all of these metrics that we're using. We understand that tight times make for tighter budgets. However, a loss of $22 million through an ill-advised implementation of a BRFA is an insult to the sector that serves the state's most vulnerable populations and, as I said, has been underfunded for 24 of those 26 years. We regret that this decision, we regret this decision is justified by claims of declining enrollment. Well, everybody's enrollment declined during COVID. And as you just heard from Brad, our community college enrollment, of course, is naturally beginning to climb again. But we also were told that there is a supposition that we have pots of money somewhere in our systems and that we don't need to be fully funded by the CADE formula. We believe that when the legislature approved full funding of CADE in 2022, you did so because you share our commitment to leading with equity and because you see us as we see ourselves. And that is truly as the state's premium workforce engine. No other sector of higher education in Maryland can do what we can do for the 300,000 students who sit in our classrooms. So in 2022, we thanked you. We celebrated you when full CADE was finally fully approved. We thought we had won more than a momentary handshake deal. Given the populations we serve, we thought we had been given the promise of full funding that was promised in 1996 by law. So if a dream deferred is a dream denied, as the saying goes, so is a promise. We asked that you resoundingly reject the BRFA and resoundingly support full funding for the CADE formula. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and all of the delegates. I am Felicia Williams, President of Prince George's Community College. And let me just say, I share the same drumbeat that has already been presented by Dr. Phillips as well as Dr. Curtinitis. But I also want to offer to you a different premise by which you should consider reversing the recommended budget as well as the BRFA. And that is one of mission and one of investment. I believe that each of you as delegates are committed to the state of Maryland. And I do believe that you're committed to the economic well-being of our respective community. We see that because of your investment in our public school systems, namely with Maryland's Blueprint for the Future. We see that because of your investment also in our higher education system, namely the work that you're doing with USM. But if we were to look at what you're doing with community colleges, we would say that there is a failure in the midst. We are indeed a system, even though we may not register that way in terms of our protocols and our presentation. But when you think about the well-being of the state and our community, education is connected. It is streamlined. Our students move from one to the next to the other. The recommended posture actually weakens education in the state of Maryland. As you seek to strengthen what is happening at the front door of K-12, you will leave a place to nowhere by weakening the community college model. They will not all exit the doors and the hollowed halls of high schools and enter into USM. They will need a place to go. And I charge you that it is your responsibility to consider that as the loss of funding weakens what is the most democratic model of education that we have in our system. At Prince George's Community College, the loss of that funding would be very critical. We too have a number of students that we are supporting through our own model of free tuition. We too would have to advance an increase in tuition in order to balance this model. Fundamentally, that means that fewer students would be able to receive and to take advantage of those very dollars that we have worked so hard to garner. So by the same token, while you're holding us accountable for growth, which we're now in that posture and in that place where we're doing so, you're also weakening our capacity to continue to do so for the most vulnerable populations. So we encourage you to rethink, to re-examine the data that has been provided. We also encourage you to think about the future rather than to utilize reversely engineered data for the purpose of making a decision. I understand that sometimes it is the best available, but from the perspective of investment, the thought pattern is to think forward. So as you advance what is your economic goals for the state of Maryland, as you begin to think about what is the business posture that is desired for the next 10 years, as you begin to think about the economic development plans, the need for a talent pipeline in order for us to be more attractive to the business economy, then I implore you to think about how that talent pipeline will be developed. And therefore, the investments to get to where you want to be are the investments that occur now, not when you get to that point, because the absence of the talent pipeline will impede our ability to do so. So again, the positions have been well stated. We understand the significance of the budget challenges. We simply ask that you look more carefully and more thoughtfully across the places where indeed those cuts might be made that are not going to do harm to the very mission and the very investments that you're trying to make and the well-being of our state. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't clap. Thank you. Sorry. I just want to make a major point of clarification. The MGA, the Maryland General Assembly, we funded CADE fully. The Moore administration's proposal in the BRFA is proposing to cut you. So I want you to make sure you know
We've got it.
who's had your
Thank
back
you.
and who's making the proposals that you're reacting to. So we do have an obligation to look at the administration's proposal. And as you heard from the budget analysts, we have already identified that looking at different enrollment numbers is fueling this cut. And so when I was hearing the testimony, I was like, I want it to be clear. It's the administration that is proposing this. And I think that for those who are tuning in via YouTube, I want you to know that's who's proposing it, not my subcommittee. But at any rate, thank you so much for your testimony. I have a quick question, then I'll go on to others. This is for Dr. Phillips. As you were noting how the CADE formula is being implemented in this proposed budget is obviously going to further disadvantage community colleges. But I think in general, based on the testimony of Dr. Kronitis and everyone else who serves in this capacity, two-year schools are doing different work than four-year schools because your students have very different needs. And so my question for you, do you think the CADE formula is itself something that should be revisited? Do you think it's too antiquated to meet the needs of what we are asking our community colleges to do? And if you do have thoughts on alternatives to CADE based on what other states are doing or what have you, we would be eager to hear that.
That's a big question. What I've found in my time working for community colleges is what we have in the books must be properly executed. It's just an academic exercise if every year whatever happens to be there gets used as a leverage to balance the state's budget. It has to be a commitment. I would think for the state of Maryland and this committee to be thinking about, well, how do we make sure that we're providing opportunities for people to get gainful employment and reach the quality of life in order to be self-sufficient? You really do need to think that maybe a high school diploma is not only the answer anymore. You have to have some type of post-secondary. And being able to get people that opportunity sooner rather than later would be a tremendous asset to this committee. So in some regards, whether it be 29, just last year we had a proposal to raise the percentage tied to 30. We do need to think about whatever the mechanism is in the budget, that it is something that we can all work on together, that's sustainable, right, and that we can plan for. We've actually during that decade, I didn't mention this, but we've been able to graduate more students than we've ever had before, even when the denominator was small. So the funding that was coming in, we were able to use for support services to get students through to completion. And thinking about homelessness, displaced youth, food insecurities, those are some of the new challenges that may not have been incorporated in the CADE formula when it was originally proposed. But it's a study. It's not going to be done in a balancing budget act. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Delegate Harris.
Appreciate it, Madam Chair, and I'm grateful for our chair for clearing that up for us as we move deeper into these conversations. And once again, thank you all for being here. So my statement and question that will follow is, at the end of the day, I know when there's budget hits, sometimes we have a habit of looking at education and have a habit of looking at safety, where we believe that education is actually vital. We should be looking to see how we can strengthen all these areas. And so you all mentioned that you may have to look at increasing tuitions, which if you increase tuition, in some cases, it will affect enrollment. And we just saw in 2023 a 5,000 increase in enrollment. And so if enrollment decreases, your budget is decreasing, then what would you have to adjust in schools, in your community colleges, to even maintain the level where you would like to be effective?
May I try to answer that, because your question touches on something that's really fundamental for us, and enrollment is only a part of the equation. Mm-hmm. No matter whether enrollment is up or enrollment is down, our other obligation is to be able to deliver programming that is absolutely 21st century cutting edge. That means investments in staffing, equipment, facilities, technology, many institutional systems, And what happened to us over the many years when we would be sitting in front begging for full funding is you have to make decisions. You don't hire, you don't upgrade this laboratory, you don't build this building, or you don't create the kinds of supports that you need for students because you really can't afford to have a director of career services or a director of community outreach for students who are homeless and so forth. I mean, our populations are so different from our four-year colleagues, and our needs at the delivery level to be able to put a qualified instructor in front of a class, you must be able to pay that person the right amount of money. You can't sit them down at computers that are 10 years old. So that's a part of the equation. And for me, the day that it became possible for me to begin thinking about investing in these systems was the day that you all supported the full funding of CADE. And that gave us the liberality in terms of funding to be able to go big, where we've just been going in baby steps all along the way.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that. And that's the answer that I was looking for, because we always talk, we've been like the theme for our subcommittee for the past few weeks of the return on investments, right? And so I think when we affect community colleges this way, it affects the return on investment for the entire state. We don't get the return on investment for the entire state in the workforce, which affects us wholly, and it affects our labor department as well. So I appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Willig.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to just begin by thanking all of you for the work that you do. This is so critical for our state. The mission to allow young people to thrive and flourish and live purposeful, meaningful lives is, at the center of your work. So I really thank you for that. I want to have just a clarification question, because I think part of the presentation is somewhat misleading from the and so bolsters your case. If you look at the cost or let's say funding that community colleges have gotten over the course of the last years, the funding has been going up, right? Mm-hmm. However, enrollment has been decreasing until this very last year. And so one would think that, okay, maybe you don't need as much money because your enrollment has gone down. However, my thought is that input costs have gone up, right? Salary, cost of living, your faculty and staff. And so the second layer of data would be somewhat helpful to understand the narrative in a more fulsome way. So is that something that can be provided where we can get to see how that proportional, so I'm thinking like a pie chart, so what that looks like in terms of where those monies are going and how has that shifted over time? And would this cut, frankly, impact that proportion? And I'm talking sort of with the pie chart in my mind, which might not be translating, so for which I apologize.
Did you want to respond to that?
I will try, and then Dr. Williams can fill in the blanks that I missed. But to your point, try not to get the ringing. If enrollment's the only thing that matters, that's not telling the story. That's just the denominator. We can't help them if they don't enter into our institutions. But even though enrollment had been declining, we were actually graduating more students year after year after year that came to us because of some of the funding opportunities that we had. And we learned that it's the supports that students need now more than ever, whether it be the time in their life or the socio conditions in which they live, where we've been able to help them through to completion. We definitely think there could be more opportunities to help non-traditional students. There is no policy intervention per se outside of the Promise Scholarship that helps single parents, working adults with families really be able to work and go to school in a manner that actually provides them the help that they need. But we did write a JCR this summer, and it does show the trend in increased spending and support services and the output that's produced as a result of some of the funding that we've had. I hope that helps answer sort of your question.
Yes, thank you. I think just making it apparent where the costs are going, because if you are also spending more on student support services because of the need, whether it's food insecurity or homelessness and other things that you spoke to, right? It's not
Right.
just enrollment, it's all these other things that are really feeding into supporting our young people, which again is not obvious when you just see
Right.
the enrollment numbers and the funding. I think there's a lot more there that really helps paint the picture of the need for the institutions.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
and let me just add, I think we all have to acknowledge the way we do our work changed because of COVID. So we adopted and adapted new modalities and new ways of delivering services, not just instruction, but all of these wraparound support services that may have been a bit minimalist that now have become essential. They're embedded parts of the way that we do our work. Just the deployment of technology alone and the increased costs around creating alternative work institutions, right? Where we have employees that are working from home and they're working from our institutions. And so we are providing them additional devices in order to be serviceable to our students in the midst of that. We've all experienced increased energy costs. So there's some practicality that's here that says what has happened in the cost of doing business at the simultaneously where we've had this enrollment decline. But in the midst of it, our focus has been on student success, right, and increasing student outcomes. I think another analysis is what does it cost to get to a successful graduate or completer? And that price point has changed per student.
If I might add.
Of course.
I'm sorry, may I just add one more observation that may give you a sense about how we worry less about enrollment as a measurement of our success, and it is this: when the economy is challenged, our enrollment zooms. So in 2010, my college had 72,000 students. Now, we could hardly handle 72,000 students, but that's who came to us. So it's not surprising in this very robust economy that people have jobs, they've got lives, they've got families. So they're less inclined to need to come to CCBC or one of our colleagues to retrain and get a new lease on life. And I would just add this, that our college was founded in 1957. If our county or our state or our board said, you must increase enrollment by 2% every single year, or you won't be showing your worth, I can't do the math this quickly, but we'd probably have to be serving about 150,000 students right now. That's just not reasonable to think that enrollment is the real pressure point by which we get measured. I think it's really the success of the students who we actually now, more than ever, help to reach a degree or a certificate.
Thank you so much. Delegate Grace.
To add, thank you, Madam Chair. To add on to Delegate Harris's question, I mean, you have this downward spiraling dilemma, where, if you raise tuition, enrollment goes down, you get less funding from the state. You can only do that for so long, I would imagine. In order to get those students back into these institutions, you'd have to stop increasing tuitions in order to be able to do that. So what you'd have to do at some point would be to make cuts to programs. And so, what would be the low hanging fruit? I mean, where would you have to go first if you had to make cuts at some point in the future?
Let me just say, I think for each institution, we would have to conduct that analysis. For me, our priority would be staying as close to our core mission as possible in the work. What that does for my institution, let me just share the impact, are the number of programs that we have that are forward-facing in our community, that serve our senior citizens, that serve a number of students that are attending based upon waivers. And honestly, there isn't, they're unfunded mandates in terms of some of those programs. We offer them and we subsidize them based upon the students that are paying tuition, right, to be able to do it. And so it's a careful analysis to begin to think about that. We have come through the pandemic. We've learned how to institute hiring frosts or freezes. We have learned how to curtail expenditures, such as travel and levels of professional development. We know how to do that, right? We know how to be good stewards of the resources that are presented to us. The cuts here are so deep that we don't have much of a margin left. So that's where we then have to begin to explore our direct services within our respective communities. And so that would require each institution to conduct that type of analysis.
Thank you so much. Delegate Forbes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here today. You know, we sit here and we hear about the education budgets from early childhood all the way through graduate work, and we know the important part you play. And in my mind, the most important role you have as community colleges in workforce development. I mean, your ability to meet the needs of our employers is second to none. And your ability, your agility to change like the programs you're offering to make sure we have people that are trained to do the work in our hospitals or to drive our trucks. So could you talk a little bit about that, about the programs that you have that really are filling in gaps where without your graduates, we wouldn't have people in those jobs?
Well, I'd like to take that challenge because we are large, so we do have some very large programs. And I'll start with health professions. CCBC has 54 different nursing and allied healthcare professions, and that ranges from very short-term 8-week home health aid all the way up to the ADN BSN. So every year we graduate 400, 500 nurses. Now, there is no doubt that every medical facility in our region looks to us and to our graduates to meet their needs. And then if you go just a little beyond that, we had this wonderful opportunity to host a White House introduction of the new director, national director of cyber. And as that was occurring, certainly we did our work and we discovered, sitting in our classes, we have 6,400 technology students, and many of them do not even have to apply for a job because NSA and others will come right to our classrooms, recruit them out of the classrooms, give them a full-time job, then pay for them to come back and finish their degree. And that is true in business and accounting. It's true in the humanities. It's true in almost every venture. We teach people how to fly airplanes. We teach people how to do welding. We teach people, I mean, you name it, we do it. And it isn't that we think it's a good idea. It is, what does our industry partnership with this company or that company or the other tell us that they need? And that, I think, is in part responsive to the compliment that you gave us, that in fact, we are the premier workforce development arm of the state. And that doesn't mean that we just train truck drivers or we just train welders for responsiveness to business needs. Everything we do is workforce development, whether we're training accountants or nurses or welders or plumbers or poets and dancers. That's the span that we cover, and that's the way we approach this. So transferring to a four-year institution is important. Moving into the workforce is as important.
And one more follow-up. And where do your students go when they graduate? Where do they live?
Oh, thank you. 93% of them will return to the communities in which they grew up. So if you think about what happens to university students when they graduate and go back to Alaska and Nevada and Utah and Massachusetts, then you think about CCBC's, Prince George's, so any one of us, 93% of our students just go right back into their communities. They get jobs, they pay taxes, they buy houses, they send their kids to public schools, and they are parts of the community. Thank you. That's a wonderful question. And I hope I gave you a sense of how embedded we are into the well-being, the economic and social well-being of our communities.
Thank you so
Delegate
much.
Grice.
I hate to get another bite at the apple here, but I don't have a question, just a comment based on Delegate Forbes' last question. And I think a lot of us know about all the programming that most of our community colleges do when it comes to continuing ed and preparing for 4 years. But I will say that on the midshore, the 5 counties on the midshore, we're actually partnering. Our LEAs are partnering with Chesapeake College for Pillar 4 to actually grow our CTE. We're trying to model it after our regional tech school in Washington County. And so we're going above and beyond. They don't have to do this. This is a huge task for the college to do that, but they are partnering with our local school systems in order to provide that service so we can implement the blueprint. And not only that, prepare our high school students for careers. So I mean, these guys are doing above and beyond, or they're expected to, or we're expecting them to do over the next several years, to go above and beyond what they've ever done in the past too. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for this panel? Well, I just want to say that this subcommittee and the Appropriations Committee at large, we understand the importance of community colleges for all the reasons you've listed. When I was an undergrad, I attended Tidewater Community College to help with some affordability issues, even though I eventually received my degree from Hampton University. And so I know firsthand the importance community colleges have. And I do also know that if we're going to leverage various tech hub identifications and other economic development visions for our state to have Maryland's decade, there's no way we're going to have Maryland's decade with our higher education community less potent and less resourced than necessary to carry out the work. So we here do appreciate everything that you've shared with us today, and also what you've been doing. It's not what you're starting, it's what you've been doing, and you want to continue to do it and do it well, and we want you to. So message received, and we thank you for all being here today. We have one more panel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have one more panel of favorable testimony from individuals. We have William Primash, Samantha Zwirling, and Brendan Diamond. William Primash, Samantha Zwirling, and Brendan Diamond. Maybe it's just two of you today. Hello.
Would you like to start? Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify. I've been teaching at Montgomery College now as an adjunct professor for nearly 2 decades, and I'm also a proud member of SEIU Local 500. I'm here today to ask that you continue supporting full CADE funding and reject the governor's proposed budget cuts. I've witnessed firsthand the difference that community colleges are making for young people, particularly the many students who are limited by low incomes and other disadvantages. It's so satisfying to see them grow in ability and ambition. Their education, whether through college level academic courses or workforce development training, is opening the door to gainful employment and a higher quality of life. And all of us benefit from the contribution that they make to the state's economic development. The CADE formula is vital for community colleges because it enables them to plan, as many of the previous panelists have said, plan for a future within the framework of a predictable funding. The proposed budget cuts would inevitably affect students, faculty, and academic programs. Knowing personally the challenges so many of my students face in paying for college, typically more than 2/3 of my classes are working, I'm particularly concerned about the impact of cuts on tuition and also how they will affect support services so many disadvantaged students need to succeed. And the college's ability to retain qualified faculty will also be put at risk. We understand the legislature must address significant budget deficits, but burdening community colleges with funding cuts now would be short-sighted, particularly as their enrollments are starting to recover from the effects of COVID. Such cuts would inevitably weaken the network of institutions so important for the state's economic development and also limit educational opportunities for many of its neediest residents. I urge you, therefore, to reject the proposed budget cuts and continue to support full funding under CADE. Thank you for considering my views.
Good afternoon, members of the subcommittee. Great to see you all. Samantha Zwirling with the Maryland State Education Association, representing 75,000 educators across the state. Usually I'm here talking about K through 12 education, but a few years ago, you all passed a bill allowing faculty and staff at community colleges to collectively bargain. And to date, MSDA represents the full-time faculty at Hartford College and Warwick Community College. And so we're proud to be here to talk about this budget cut. Like their K-12 colleagues, as you just heard, educators at community college want to serve the students the best they can. And unfortunately, these cuts would be felt deeply, especially amongst our small community colleges. I will also note that many faculty wanted to be here today, but they're teaching. Thursday is a day when it's hard to get out of classes. We applaud your commitment to the blueprint, and we are so appreciative of that. And I just want to make some connections of why the community colleges are so important to the blueprint, as has been mentioned here before. In the blueprint, students are encouraged to participate in dual enrollment programs in 11th and 12th grade if they have met their college and career readiness standards by the end of 10th grade. And so the goal is for students to leave high school with college credits, with an accreditation. This is a big change for how we've done education in the past, and it's really important. Many of our faculty members are learning on how to adjust to teaching K through 12 students, these high school students. So it's a different kind of role, and we're concerned about the impact of these budget cuts to be able to provide that. The blueprint also calls for coordination with community colleges on developing career and technical education programs. I think you all know those are extremely important to our students. I will just say quickly is that there have been briefings in the legislature around chronic absenteeism and things like that. College and career readiness and CTE programs help kids stay in school. They want to go, they want to learn. It's connected to a job. It's important. So I'll just end by saying MSEA urges you all to restore full funding in FY25 and eliminate the ongoing cuts in the BRFA. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions for this panel? Seeing none, thank you. That concludes all favorable testimony. Moving to individual unfavorable testimony is Christopher Kano and Mari Weprecht present? Mr. Kano? Marie or Mari Weprecht? Okay, maybe it's just you today. Great to see you.
Thank you. Honorable members, my name is Christopher Kano. I'm the Director of Political and Legislative Affairs for SAU Local 500, which is a union that represents over 20,000 members in Maryland, including faculty at our community colleges. We ask that you fully fund the CADE formula for the upcoming fiscal year. The proposed budget would result in devastating cuts to institutions that serve vital educational and economic roles in our communities. The past 2 years finally saw CADE fully funded after decades of misplaced priorities, resulting in community colleges leading higher education institutions was an 8.3 increase in enrollment. This means that our members will have to serve students with less time when they need more resources the most. The blueprint for Maryland's future has set clear goals from cradle to career for our residents. And it is our community colleges that are asked to shoulder the monumental task of revitalizing our workforce to compete globally in the 21st century, while only receiving 75% of necessary tuition costs. So we ask this body, are the commitments made to the education of our people genuine or merely political rhetoric? Will you commit today to fully funding our community colleges? Or are you going to ask your constituents to shoulder the increased tuition costs in a time of economic hardship? Are you going to commit to providing the resources required by educational workers at our community colleges? Or are you going to ask them to do more with less? While you debate these questions, we again ask for your consideration in fully funding our community colleges through the CADE formula and ensure that faculty and staff have the resources necessary to deliver a world-class education. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Kano, for your testimony. Are there any questions for him? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony. And that will conclude the bill hearing for our aid to community colleges. Thank you so much for your attendance and your leadership at your respective campuses. Our next budget hearing will be with the Maryland Department of Labor. We'll first begin with a presentation from our budget analyst, Emily Haskell.
You're free, Mr. Rowland. Leave it off the.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, my name is Emily Haskell, and I'm presenting the budget analysis for the Maryland Department of Labor. I'll start on page 1 with the operating budget summary. You can see the department's budget decreases by $14.6 million or 2.3% to $607.4 million. General funds increased by $22 million or 36%, and that's mostly due to the administrative costs for the Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program. Turning ahead to the bottom of page 6, there's a brief discussion about a fiscal 2023 closeout issue with the Baltimore City Youth Works program. A portion of the funding was reverted in error, and I've asked the department to comment on addressing the general fund shortfall. On page 7, you can see that in fiscal 2024, the General Assembly added 2 items to the department's budget. The first is funding for 5 new positions for wage and hour investigators, which the department is currently recruiting to fill. And the second item was $50,000 for a grant to the Lincoln Technical Institute to support a career fair. And the department should comment on the status of dispersing those funds to the grantee. Turning to page 12, related to correctional education. Exhibit 4 shows that the students served under the department's correctional education programs has rebounded post-pandemic, serving 4,200 students in fiscal 2023. The fiscal 2025 budget includes several enhancements for correctional education programs, including adding 8 regular positions. Most of these new positions are for transition specialists who lead programming such as job search preparation, financial literacy, and parenting classes. And the addition of these positions will allow transition classes to be offered more regularly. The fiscal 2025 allowance also includes an increase of $1.6 million for correctional education contracts, which will expand internet infrastructure and also allow for the continued use of tablets in correctional education programs. On the bottom of page 13, there's a discussion of increased general funds for workforce development, including $2 million to expand the Employment Advancement Right Now, or EARN program, as well as $2 million for a new talent innovation program. The proposed program would support job training in emerging industries with initial pilot focused on the cybersecurity workforce and the expansion of cyber ranges. DLS recommends deleting the $4 million in increased general funds for these workforce initiatives due to competing priorities for funding. On the top of page 14, you can see there's $2.8 million in special funds that were included in fiscal 2024 to modernize the department's electronic licensing system. The fiscal 2025 allowance includes $2.8 million again in fiscal 2025 for this program in error, and DLS recommends deleting the funds included in error. The fiscal 2024 budget bill did include language restricting the fiscal 2024 funds for the project, pending the submission of an implementation plan. And the department submitted that report in January, noting that the department plans to hire both a project manager and business analyst to develop a project strategy by the end of fiscal 2024. If no objections are raised in this hearing, I can initiate the process to have the restricted funds released. I'll turn now to page 16. The first issue in the analysis relates to the Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program. The family program will provide up to 12 weeks of benefits for covered individuals taking leave from employment to take care of a family member or for other specified reasons. Legislation last session made several modifications to the program, including delaying the start date with contributions to the program under current law beginning on October 1st, 2024, and claims for benefits beginning January 1st, 2026. Due to the tight implementation timeline, the department is proposing legislation to further delay the family program, with contributions pushed back by 9 months to July 1st, 2025, and claims pushed back by 6 months to July 1st, 2026. Exhibit 5 on page 17 shows the funding in the budget for administrative costs for family in both fiscal 2024 and in the allowance. In general funds and federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act are being used for administrative costs until contributions to the program are sufficient to cover those costs. In fiscal 2024, rainy day funds as well as ARPA funds were used, whereas in fiscal 2025, the allowance includes $16 million in general funds and the remainder in ARPA funds. The family division is rapidly staffing up as it prepares for implementation. As of the time of writing, 14 positions were filled and several more were actively working through the hiring process. The fiscal 2025 allowance includes 328 new positions for a total of 368 in the division. Most of these positions, the largest group is for claims center staff, but there are also large numbers of various administrative and fiscal positions as well. The last note on family, the department issued the request for proposals for the development of a new IT system in January, and they anticipate making an award by this April. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about unemployment insurance. As you can see in Exhibit 6 on page 19, claims volume has returned to pre-pandemic levels, but the time to process both claims and appeals is still lengthy, as you can see in Exhibits 7 and 8. For example, in Exhibit 8 on page 21, you can see the lower appeals division processed only 7% of cases within its 45-day target in fiscal 2023. The department has hired additional examiners and is holding extra hearings, but the backlog is expected to be difficult to clear quickly. In the middle of page 22, you can see the federal funding provided by the U.S. Department of Labor has been insufficient in recent years to cover the department's administrative costs, leading the department to need a combined nearly $65 million in general funds and ARPA funds across fiscal 2022 to 2024 to support administrative costs. I've asked the department to comment on the anticipated need for continued state support to fund administrative costs. Exhibit 9 on page 23 provides an update on progress toward addressing audit findings related to unemployment insurance. Several items are still outstanding, but the department has advised that these are primarily related to reconciling issues that occurred during the pandemic rather than ongoing issues. The third issue in the analysis relates to apprenticeships. Exhibit 10 on page 24 shows the growth in apprentices and apprenticeship programs over the last several years. Funding has grown as well, including a recent $6 million federal award for apprenticeship expansion, as well as $25 million still available in the dedicated purpose account from fiscal 2023, and an additional $2.5 million in the fiscal 2025 allowance in the dedicated purpose account for public sector apprenticeships. Legislation last session established the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission, which met throughout this past interim and made several recommendations for administrative actions and items for further study. And the commission will continue its work this coming interim with a final report expected by December 2024. Finally, I'll draw your attention on page 29. This page shows the recommended actions, including the 2 items recommending deleting funding for new workforce initiatives and deleting the funds budgeted in error for the licensing system. And that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for that overview. Are there any questions for the analysts? Seeing none, thank you so much. At this time, we'll be hearing from Secretary Wu with the Department of Labor, and feel free to bring your team. Great to see everyone again.
Nice to see you. Good afternoon, Chair Smith, Vice Chair Harris, and members of the subcommittee. For the record, I am Portia Wu, the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Labor. I'm joined here at the table by our Deputy Secretary, Jason Perkins Cohen, and we have a number of our division leaders here, and of course, our outstanding budget team who did a great job on this to answer specific questions if needed. On behalf of our department, I'd like to thank Governor Moore, Lieutenant Governor Miller, and the Department of Budget and Management for their support for our department and this budget proposal. And of course, we want to thank DLS analyst Emily Haskell for her excellent work. The Department of Labor's programs touch nearly every Marylander in ways critical to workers' safety, economic security and well-being, businesses' capacity to source talent and grow, and communities' ability to thrive. I want to highlight a few areas in which our department's work and this budget are critical to the state's growth and success. We are at a pivotal moment in our state's economic trajectory, and we need to decide whether we're going to supercharge our economy or remain content with the status quo. Although Maryland has the lowest unemployment rate in the nation, our labor force participation continues to lag. That's putting the brakes on our economic growth, which continues to lag the nation and fall behind neighboring states like Pennsylvania and Virginia. If we want to compete for good jobs, capital investment, and innovative industries, we need to address this now. A survey of Chamber of Commerce executives reports, and frankly, any business owner in the state will tell you, that having a skilled workforce is the #1 most important factor in their success. We need to get more Marylanders back in the labor force if we are to make our economy lead in both growth and opportunity. Because we know that workforce development is really our economic force multiplier, this budget doubles down on evidence-based strategies with proven outcomes to provide workforce talent. It proposes to leverage resources from philanthropy and the private sector to attract industries of the future and spur economic growth for decades to come. That's why the Department of Labor respectfully disagrees with the DLS recommendations to cut the $2 million in additional funding to earn, as well as the $2 million proposed for the Talent Innovation Fund. And I'd like to spend a minute or two addressing each of these. EARN, which stands for Employment Advancement Right Now, is a nationally recognized workforce grant program that supports industry-led, regionally focused training and prepares Marylanders for meaningful careers in leading industries. It supports partnerships that work with over 1,000 employers across the state, from small machining shops on the Eastern Shore to biotech manufacturing along the I-270 corridor and construction remediation in Baltimore. The program has served more than 20,000 Marylanders since it began, providing upskilling to over 13,000 workers to help them advance in their existing jobs and support their employers, and helping thousands of Marylanders enter into new employment in these industries. Governor Moore has charged us with investing in programs that have a demonstrated return on investment, and EARN delivers a tremendous bang for the buck. An independent evaluation found that every dollar invested in this program leads to over $17 of total economic impact for Maryland. So that means $2 million in additional funding in FY25 would bring an estimated $34 million in return to the state, and would enable at least an additional 500 Marylanders opportunities to join the labor force and secure jobs in key industries. The department has received overwhelming interest in EARN at a level that far exceeds current available funds, and so we urge the committee to expand this program so we can increase our labor force participation numbers and better compete with our neighboring states for good jobs. The budget also includes, our proposed budget also contains a new and complementary investment in a proposed Talent Innovation Fund. And I will note we have a piece of legislation that goes hand in hand with the budget proposal. This fund would leverage resources from philanthropy and industry to meet training and skills needs in Maryland's prominent emerging industry sectors, such as cybersecurity, healthcare, biotech, advanced manufacturing, and artificial intelligence. We propose to use this initial $2 million on a competitive grant to pilot cyber ranges, a well-recognized method for developing work-ready cyber talent. A recent report projected that in the Mid-Atlantic region, we would need 30,000 to 50,000 additional cybersecurity professionals by 2030, but the cyber executives surveyed were concerned about finding that workforce in the region. This is an area of strength for Maryland, and we cannot and should not be ceding this ground to our neighboring states just because we have failed to connect the dots. We therefore urge the Assembly to retain the $2 million for the Talent Innovation Fund. The proposed budget also makes, as the analyst noted, needed investments in registered apprenticeships. Our apprenticeship program has continued to grow. We have over 11,000 registered apprentices in Maryland right now, and more than 850 youth apprentices, which is a historic high. However, under the blueprint, we have very ambitious goals to meet here, and we need to accelerate that progress several-fold. These investments will help us to do that. We also need to ensure that our workforce system serves those who face the greatest barriers to work. This year, nearly 1,300 Marylanders are expected to exit the criminal justice system. They're entering a world where even applying for the most entry-level job requires applying online. Yet Marylanders and correctional facilities are often using typewriters to put together their resumes. That's setting them up for failure, which impacts recidivism and public safety, as well as being a huge harm to them. And that's why this budget increases investments in correctional education to bring more skilled educators and job trainers into our facilities and provide current technology to support training and job skills in places like Jessup and Westover. There are a few other critical ways in which the department's work supports attachment to workforce. Those include family and medical leave and unemployment insurance. Paid family and medical leave not only supports workers during a serious health event or when they have a new child, It also helps businesses and our economy by increasing attachment to the workforce. When I appeared before this committee last year, paid leave in Maryland was still just words on a piece of paper. We hadn't yet received our funds or our personnel. Since that time, we have established a new paid leave division, hired core subject matter experts, and conducted extensive stakeholder engagement in which over 1,300 people across the state have participated. We have published our draft regulations and, as was mentioned, have issued a request for proposals to begin work on our IT infrastructure. Unemployment insurance is also a critical program that assists individuals who have lost their jobs and are actively seeking work. While claims have returned to pre-pandemic levels, we continue to face challenges with attempted fraud and identity theft, and we still have a ways to go to make sure our IT and business processes are faster and more responsive. You specifically asked in the analysis that we address the issue of support for UI going forward. Candidly, federal administrative dollars for UI have not kept pace with modern needs. While we were able to bridge these gaps with some ARPA funding, as was noted, we will need to think of a new path in the future. The department has been working closely with DVM to try to figure out how to resolve this ongoing issue. Fortunately, we expect to receive $11 million plus another $4 million grant from the Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor, later this year to assist in unemployment insurance modernization and customer service. That will help, but we still need to consider longer-term reforms to determine how we have enough money both in the trust fund to support benefits and also to sustain a program that's administered in a more responsive and rapid way. Finally, this budget protects Marylanders on the job and in the marketplace, making our state a more resilient and fair place to do business. Enforcing our laws ensures that workers are paid fairly and businesses are not disadvantaged by competitors who don't pay overtime or benefits. We want to thank the General Assembly for adding 5 additional positions in FY24 to investigate wage and hour complaints. And this proposal for the next fiscal year adds additional enforcement muscle with 5 more investigators in workplace fraud. The budget also supports our ongoing work in financial regulation and consumer protection, including the implementation of the Access to Banking Act's Community Investment Venture Fund to enable Maryland state chartered banks and credit unions to better serve low and moderate income communities. And it includes funding for personnel and IT investments so we can modernize operations and professional licensing, as well as other key areas across the agency. In closing, this proposed budget supports a strong future for Maryland, where our state continues to grow emerging industries like cybersecurity, sustainable infrastructure, and biotechnology, while closing opportunity and income gaps, protecting workers and consumers, and serving businesses. We request the committee support these investments to help our state reach its full potential, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Secretary Wu. Are there any questions? Well, I just want to say thank you for the work you're doing. I see you do have a big goal to increase our apprenticeships to 60,000 by 2030. So you get your work cut out for you, but I'm glad that you're keeping your eyes on the prize. And I also want to say just really a deep thank you for the work you're doing behind the wall, improving the quality of education for those that are going to soon return to our communities. And if it's not characterized that way, I would like you to know that I see it as a part of public safety, that we're sending people back to communities better able to be law-abiding and tax-paying. So thank you for the work you and your team are doing, and anything we can do to continue to strengthen that work. I'm sure we all want to do what we can. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
That concludes that panel. We do have one individual witness who wanted to provide a favorable with amendment. Is Cindy Smalls with AFSCME here? There you are. I didn't see you there. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Cindy Smalls, representing AFSCME Council 3. I thank you for the opportunity to come before you and just give testimony. I first like to just start out by saying that we appreciate Secretary Wu and the staff at the department for creating just a great work environment and just becoming a real partner. And so we hope to, build upon that communication and that dialogue. And so I just wanted to just say that. In reference to the analysis, AFSCME supports the additional positions added to the family implementation in FY 25. We are happy to see that the 328 positions will be added. We're happy that those positions will be in-house. And we're hoping that those positions will be full-time merit positions as well. I just wanted to highlight that currently there's roughly about 227 current workers who are contractor workers. And we're hoping that, this year that we might be able to move those workers into full-time merit positions. In addition, we're hoping to have our members work under a telework agreement that is fair and consistent for workers who are eligible to telework. In the analysis, it did mention OSHA complaints that are high OSHA complaints at this time. And we're just hoping that the department will just deal with those complaints. So we still have members, who come to us and just give complaints about certain work conditions. And so we're hoping that the department will address those. And just lastly, we've heard from our members that DLL is still using contract workers for their UI processing calls. We're just hoping that if they do contract out, our members are just saying that maybe we can take an opportunity to hire workers who are from Maryland to do those jobs. And with that, again, we thank the department, for a good working relationship, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And I think we all like to help Marylanders get employed. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you so much for your time. That concludes the budget hearing for the Department of Labor. Thank you to everyone who's come for that. And our last budget hearing will be focused on MSDE headquarters. And we'll begin with our budget analyst, Laura Hyde.
Thank you very much. Starting on page 1 with the operating budget summary, this chart shows that MSD's fiscal 2025 budget decreases by $11.1 million or 2.9% to $373.1 million. These changes include net increases of $3.5 million in general funds and $700,000 in special funds, offset by a net decrease of $15 million in federal funds. The next section in the analysis is managing results, and that starts on page 7. Looking at Exhibit 1, this chart shows that career and technology education graduation rates for the 22-23 school year indicate that CTE graduates continue to outperform the 4-year graduation rate of all Maryland students, which is 86.3%. Their average graduation rate is 96.6%. Turning to page 8, Exhibit 2, this chart shows the MFR on teacher effectiveness from fiscal 2022, which is included here for reference because these data were not updated in the fiscal 2025 submission. MSDE is working to update this measure. And then turning to page 9, this is Exhibit 3 on DOORS, employment outcomes. This measure also has fiscal 2022 data updated, but not for fiscal 2023. And according to MSDE, this measure may need revision because two of the objectives were conflated in the past submissions. So they're working to remedy that issue. And then DLS also asked MSD to comment on the teacher effectiveness and DOORS measures. Turning to page 10, under fiscal 2023, DLS notes that MSD had a high number of encumbrances, especially general funds in the Office of the State Superintendent. And so DLS asked MSDE to comment and recommends a JCR asking MSD to continue to submit a closeout report that provides this information. The next section provides an overview of the agency's budget. This starts on page 11 under Exhibit 4. This is the overview of agency spending. This chart shows that over 90% of funding is in DOORS, the Office of the State Superintendent, and other MSD administrative offices, with the remaining 10% for school safety grants, information technology projects, and independent units that are heard in this budget under MSDE. Turning to page 13, this is Exhibit 5, the proposed budget. This table shows a net decrease in fiscal 2025 of $11.1 million across all fund sources. The primary increases are in personnel, $18.4 million. This increase is offset by decreases in all fund sources for contractual personnel, particularly $23.4 million in federal funds for contractual positions indoors. Turning to page 15. For personnel, so due to contractual conversions, MSD and independent agencies gain 113 regular positions in this budget, but this is actually only a net increase of 5 new positions. As of December 2023, MSD reported 96 vacancies, which are spread across the agency, and a turnover rate of about 8%, which remains high, but this should decrease as positions fill and the agency reduces turnover in fiscal 2024 and 2025. The next section discusses MSD headquarters issues. That starts on page 18 with Exhibit 6. This is the State Education Agency Fund distribution. So this chart shows the distribution of what's called State Education Agency funding, which is different than the funds that are distributed directly to local education agencies for pandemic-related purposes. As mandated by the federal government, MSD spent the majority of funds on a program for learning loss called Maryland Leads, and it's a set of 7 programs that are detailed in the analysis. On page 19, Exhibit 7, this offers more detailed information on Maryland Leads participation and funding by category. I should note that this table represents the DLS categorization of these programs by student, educator, and LEA. And this is not necessarily MSD's categorization, but the reason for this approach is to emphasize where the funds are distributed. And this is based on a concern that was raised last year that Maryland Leads funding may not be targeting students directly. However, this chart shows that in calendar 2023, MSD reported that LEI are directing approximately $67.3 million or 39% of Leads funds towards student learning loss in 3 programs, Science of Reading and Reimagining Use of Time and High Quality School Day Tutoring. And of the remaining amount, $90.3 million or 52% targets educator programs and $11.4 million or 7% are LEA focused programs. You turn to page 20, Exhibit 8. This chart shows Maryland Leads expenditures by LEA, and the average amount expended to date is 37.6%, which is a concern because Leads funding is comprised of American Rescue Act funds that need to be expended by September 2024. If you turn to page 21, this is Exhibit 9. This table shows that MSD has expended approximately 95% of all SEA discretionary funding. Of particular note here are new programs in calendar 2023, including $11.3 million for Maryland Works, which is funds LEA apprenticeships, $10 million for the Maryland Tutoring Corps, and $4.3 million for reducing over-identification in special education. Because the information provided by MSD in the 2023 JCR was so useful, DLS recommends committee narrative on SEA federal stimulus funding and Maryland Leads. Turning to page 23, this is Exhibit 10. This table just shows that MSD had reports outstanding as the publishing of this analysis, but as of yesterday, they have submitted all the reports. Turning to page 25, this is Exhibit 11 on school safety grant funding. In the fiscal 2025 proposed budget, the Maryland Center for School Safety receives $33.6 million for mandated programs and requested $3 million for emergency preparedness grant. Looking at the actuals for fiscal 2023, the SRO grant spent a total of $13.7 million, which is $6.3 million less than the appropriation. MCSS reports that LEAs do apply for this funding, but because the grants must supplement and not supplant local funds and other grant restrictions, LEA are not spending the full allocation. So DLS recommends that MCSS discuss how the SRO grant might be utilized fully, but also recommends canceling the special funds for the emergency preparedness grant and returning those funds to the Safe School Fund balance. So with that cancellation, the general fund allowance for SRO grants can have $3 million in general fund savings, but it would still meet the $10 million mandate for the program. The next section starts on page 28 and includes DLS recommended actions. The first action is for a report on accounting practices and closeout. The second action is for the reports I mentioned on SEA federal stimulus funds. And then the third one for Maryland leads. The remainder of the analysis provides updates on independent agencies managing for results measures, MSD's remediation of OLA findings, and an update on virtual learning. This ends my presentation, and I stand for questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hyde, for that presentation. Are there any questions for the analysts? Seeing none, thank you so much. At this time, we'll be hearing from Carrie Wright, the Interim State Superintendent of Schools, and your team. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Carrie Wright. I am the Interim State Superintendent, and with me today are two of my members of my team, Krishna Chalor, who is the Deputy Superintendent for Operations and Finance, and Donna Gunning, who is the Assistant State Superintendent for Finance. I want to take a moment just to thank you for all your hard work, and we appreciate the collaboration. I also want to take the time to thank the governor and DBM for the close work that we have been doing together and for their continued commitment to the importance of education in our state. I wanted to talk just a little bit briefly, just to say it feels really good to be back in Maryland. I don't know how many of you know me, but I began my career in Maryland, and I've ended up back here as the interim state superintendent, and it feels like a really good place to be. I have enjoyed this work. Those of you that don't know, I spent the past 9 years of my life as the state superintendent in Mississippi. So this work is very familiar to me, and looking forward to working with you in the future. We've got a lot of really great things that we're working on right now, and I kind of want just to share a few of the priorities. The state board just passed a resolution regarding the science of reading in the state of Maryland. Along with that, which I think is a really good direction for them to lean in, we are also hiring literacy instructional expert teams, and those teams will be going around the state to observe in classrooms, give feedback to teachers, give feedback to principals, and give feedback to us about what they're seeing. We want to make sure that the science of reading is being implemented the way it's intended, and this is a way to help our districts with that process. I was fortunate enough to hire our literacy lead from Mississippi. She is moving to Maryland. She started on Monday, and she's very excited to lead this work here. She's an amazing person. She's done this work and done it well, and so we're excited to have her on board. We're also going to be providing professional development for all of our coaches. There are a lot of coaches across the state. We've surveyed all the districts. We have a number of them by content area, and so we're going to be providing them training around the science of reading. So as they're working back in their schools, they know what it looks like, what it feels like, and then can be the persons that let us know what additional resources the schools and districts may need. We're also going to be providing leadership training for all the principals, because it's not just enough for teachers to know how to do this. It's important for principals to know as they're walking through classrooms, whether what they're seeing is appropriate, not only what the teachers are doing, but what the students are doing. The expert review teams from the Blueprint are out and about. They are visiting schools across the state, and once again providing feedback and written reports to those schools about what they're seeing, and offering suggestions for improvement, and also listening to some of the challenges that they're facing and bringing that information back to us. We have a math initiative called Launch Years. We know that our math scores are not where they need to be. In fact, our math scores are worse than our literacy scores, to be quite frank. And so we are working with the Dana Center out of the UT Austin, and they are really a national source for mathematics instruction. So we're going to be working with them as we develop and review our math pathways. We're also looking to expand our work-based learning and apprenticeships. We have just engaged with two of these initiatives, one local, one national. The national one is called Launch. Both of these, the one that's local is called Talent Ready. And both of these initiatives are very heavily philanthropically funded. And so we're excited about that, because they are going to be focusing on how to help us expand our work-based learning and apprenticeships in Maryland. We're also in conversation with various philanthropies to see how they can come in and contribute to our focus on the science of reading, and to our focus on early learning and early literacy. And there'll be more of that to come. Moving on to the department's analysis, I really want to thank Laura Hyde for her thorough review with that. That's very helpful when you get very straightforward messages about what you need to do and what you don't need to do. So thank you for that. The headquarters budget also includes the Maryland Center for School Safety, the Maryland Longitudinal Data Center System, and also the Office of the Inspector General for Education. And I know Kate Bryan and Rick Henry are here today in the audience in case you have any questions for them regarding their specific organizations. But I'm going to turn it over now to Krishna Chalur, who will address the specific requests that you made from the analysis regarding the MSDE headquarters budget. Krishna.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Krishna Tulur. As was described in the analysis presented by Ms. Hyde, MSDE was asked to comment on 4 topics. The first item was the department was asked to comment on managing for results measures for teacher effectiveness and for the Division of Rehabilitation Services. Objective 2.1, highly qualified workforce. Department removed the effective and highly effective measure due to lack of variation. The data that was reported year over year rated 97 to 98% of teachers as effective or highly effective. This measurement was removed from the fiscal 2025 submission, while the department reviews better measures to demonstrate progress towards meeting this objective. With the Division of Rehabilitation Services, department proposes separating the measures into 2 objectives: the number of people helped to obtain competitive and integrated employment, as well as number of students receiving pre-employment transition services. The first component of this measure of adults or out-of-school youth with disabilities. Pre-employment transitioning services are only available to students with disabilities ages 14 to 22 who are enrolled in secondary or post-secondary education. MSDE will work with DBM to make revisions prior to the FY 2026 MFR submissions. Next, the department was asked to comment on the encumbrance balances at the close of fiscal year 2023 in the Office of Superintendent and in the Division of Rehabilitation Services. Encumbrance balances in the Office of State Superintendent is a combination of funds for education support, professional bonuses, and assessment contract. The department received a deficiency appropriation in May of 2023 to fully fund $500 bonuses for ESP's education service professionals. The funds were fully obligated and the final liquidation occurred after the close of fiscal year. These funds have fully been liquidated. The assessment contracts cannot be fully reconciled until after the testing windows are complete. As a result, the reconciliation process extends into the following fiscal year. These assessment contracts are also fully reconciled. The Division of Rehabilitation Services encumbers medical case services funds upon authorization of services. The reconciliation is dependent on clients receiving medical services. DORS reconciles encumbrance every 6 months. The open encumbrance at the close of fiscal 2023 have been reviewed. Third, DLS recommends that MSDE comment on agency efforts to reduce vacancy rates and plans to deploy any vacancy savings in fiscal 2024. Department has worked diligently to reduce the vacancy rate at MSDE. Currently, there are 96 vacancies, representing a 13% reduction between July of 2022 to December 2023. This was a significant reduction. The largest of these position vacancies were associated with disability determination services, that right now the vacancies that we have. And these are subject to federal hiring freeze. And we are monitoring the situation and looking forward to moving with the recruitment very soon. Department was able to accomplish a significant reduction through a comprehensive marketing strategy and a collaboration with DBM to reclassify positions, making several hard-to-staff critical areas more competitive. Department is also actively monitoring any salary savings in fiscal 2024 and will make decisions if necessary on repurposing available funds later this spring. Finally, DLS recommends committee narrative requesting that MSDE continue to report on SEA federal stimulus funding, expenditures, and progress on remediation of learning loss through Maryland Leads and discretionary programs. Department recognized the need to ensure federal stimulus funding is spent timely and according to the requirements in each grant program. Department will provide data and analysis as requested. DLS recommends that MSDE comment on the status of outstanding FRPM response, as Ms. Hyde mentioned. This report has been submitted and as of yesterday, so that was addressed, and department regrets this oversight. MSDE also concurs with the operating budget recommended action on regarding reporting on accounting practices, report on SEA federal stimulus funds, as well as Maryland Leads. This concludes our testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you providing any additional testimony? No, you're here for support. Appreciate it. Awesome.
So do I.
Are there any questions for the panel? Yes, Delegate Willig.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel for your presentation. I have just a couple of questions. The first being around the emotional and mental well-being of children. I was taking a look at the categories of both mandated distributions and the discretionary purposes and programs. And I wonder which category, if you could point to, that is sort of focused on either teacher training in the space of well-being and or directed towards students in terms of programming that supports their emotional and mental well-being. And I speak to that because, as we all know, we are in a crisis situation, and I'm very interested in understanding what is being done from a preventative point of view. I have a few other, but I'll start with that.
Are you asking for a specific amount, or are you asking?
Specific programming, there's a discretionary piece and then a list of programs that are named under it. And then there's obviously the mandated distribution as well. So if there is a category that sort of focuses on either teacher training or programming that supports that.
Let me get that information for you, because rather than to do something off the top of my head, I'd rather go back and talk to staff specifically so that you've got a comprehensive answer.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Another question I have is around green schools. As you know, time in nature is so critical to the well-being of children, and the position of within MSDE that oversees green schools and among other areas that sort of contribute to that has been vacant for some time. I wondered if it has been staffed, to the best of your knowledge.
Yes, it has. Yeah, it has been filled.
Wonderful, thank you. And my last question is about the 13.9 million of unallocated funds. Can you speak to where those might be going, or that might have come up already and I might have missed it?
I'm gonna have to let one of 13.9 million. Yeah, it's on.
Okay, so the large portion of that is in the administrative portion of those federal grant programs. So there was a portion that had to go directly to LEAs. There were other portions that had to be reserved for very specific set-asides. And then the remainder is for the department's costs to administer these programs. That's where a lot of that remaining funding lies. And we are currently reviewing all of our expenditure data, including data from the LEAs, to see what we can repurpose from those available funds.
Thank you.
I do have a quick question. I saw in the overall analysis that there's been a lot of work of kind of transitioning contractual staff to full-time, and that's a big deal. I just wanted to know, has there been special assistants that are transferred to full-time, or are they a part of that transition, or is it mainly just contractual to full-time?
These are contractual positions.
All contractual. Okay, just wanted to make sure that was clear for the record. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much. There's no more questions for you as a panel. And I don't believe we have any other witnesses. No, so that concludes today's bill hearing for MSDE headquarters.